Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. Hope you can hear me. I'm Jack Chew. This is Chewing It Over, 12:30 till 1 o'clock weekdays. Most days, anyway. It's me, and this is the start of a new week. I love it when I get a chance to do my Monday shows. Sets us up for a good one, and especially love the fact that we produce educational content for you, my fellow MSK and sports physios in the main. Sometimes we do shows that sort of transcend that, but generally speaking, you are my people. But the downside is that sometimes we produce events or content that means that then you sort of spoke for choice to the point in which we start to get backlash from you, irritated about not knowing exactly which session to attend at Therapy Live, etc. So I thought I'd do a session today clarifying what we've got up and coming on the agenda for Therapy Live Sport, which is on Saturday. So last few tickets available for that, therapy-live.co.uk/tickets. You'll find it also in the description. And if you've not seen this out there, then you're in for a bit of a treat when you read through what the agenda is. Interestingly, the big news for me, which was that Jim reckons, Jim being Jack March, who puts together these programs. We suggest things together. We reach out to some speakers in our network, start to piece it together. He reckons this is our best yet. And having seen it now in full form, which I'll show you some glimpses of in a minute, I can see where he's coming from. It is a really bumper lineup, but that does mean you end up with these side-by-side two rooms that you'd be torn as to which to attend on Saturday. Fortunately, you can access the content on physiomatters.com after the fact, but you will definitely want to. There's no way you'll be able to absorb this material in any lesson a day. It's a weekend's worth of material in just a Saturday. And so I wanted to go through some of my picks of it, an absolute who's who, especially when it comes to, say, gym sports, weightlifting, and people that train. So I just wanted to show you this to start off with. This is the PDF program that's now available at therapy-live.co.uk. So do go and check that out. I can't annotate this as we go along, so I'll be flicking back and forth with me on screen. But we have got the full agenda now available at therapy-live.co.uk, and so do go and check that out. One of the things that we really wanted to do with this is make sure we brought forward solutions to some of the most common problems you guys have been telling us about, such as not necessarily understanding the relevant differences between some of the weightlifting disciplines, especially those that have emerged. Like, what is the relevant difference between, say, Olympic lifting and CrossFit? Because CrossFit has Olympic lifting within it, as well as other HIIT-related training. People trying to understand and get to grips with what people are asking of their bodies in a more, obviously you want to find that out from individual patients, but you also maybe can get insights into the discipline at large, so that then you can understand that, and then when you're finding out from individual patients how they fit within that, you've already got that insight. Especially when it comes to, say, that's just a blurred line already. Olympic lifting versus CrossFit overlap because you Olympic lift within CrossFit training typically. But then also you've got something like powerlifting and how that meets bodybuilding, right? Often similar sorts of training movements, be both of them bench pressing, both of them squatting, but for different effects, right? When bodybuilders pursue aesthetic gains compared to, say, powerlifting, of which they're trying to get their total deadlift, squat, bench press weights up. And then you've got relevant differences then in bodybuilding and powerlifting into how the weight categories might differ, and what people are doing when they are aspiring to, say, cut down when they're bodybuilding, and when they're aspiring to a show, they might well be at their weakest. Whereas in a powerlifter, he's trying to peak their peak strength at that point. So what are the relevant differences there? You've asked us, and we've put together some content for that. But there's also specific injuries, be that, say, of the wrist or the foot, the knee, how you manage someone who's a hobbyist gym goer that starts to develop some OA knee. Historically, that might have been someone that might have otherwise retired from heavy squats, but we kind of know that is not needn't be the case now. So how do you manage around that? As well as then some more niche pathologies of the shoulder and hip. How do you create workarounds that can keep people doing what they love? especially because the gyms have been closed and stuff for longer periods of time. You've got gym goers that have then repurposed themselves into runners, and triathletes been out on their bikes trying to keep fit away from, say, team sports and team gym sports. It's been an interesting one where people have sort of overloaded, or sometimes athletes that are still being a bit cautious getting back into their old routines. Some modifications at certain gyms, meaning that then they've not been either enjoying it as much, or there's been a massively modified program that mean that they can't attend certain sessions that they used to. And so we've been hearing from you as therapists to say we are looking for more answers based on the concepts of evidence-informed practice, applied understanding of how to do, to better yourself as a therapist, but with these particular patients in mind. And so we've put together an agenda that we hope will suit that need. And we love doing that for you. But unfortunately, as I've said in the title and at the start there is a problem when it clashes. I accept that. So if you haven't already, check out therapy-live.co.uk, go to the lobby, you can drive through all of that. You've got side-by-side PDF, of which I can give you this insight now. Let me hide that caption. Let's get that out of the way. So let me show you what we've got here. At the start, opening and closing is with me, and so come along and find out about how to use the platform, what we've got in store, as well as then I always do some giveaways at my opening and closing ceremonies, and so do come along and see if you can win yourself a Physio Matters membership, as well as other points and prizes from our sponsors and partners. Already, as you can see at the start there, Mehmet Cem and Steve Miller up first. Unbelievable clash of titans straight out the gates, and really quite compatible sessions. Certainly I'll be listening to both of them afterwards. But you've got injury risk reduction versus weightlifting hip issues. You've got something more specific to a body part versus something more broadly into the controversial nature of whether or not we can reduce lifting injuries. I always find it funny. Injury prevention is a funny term that people don't like to use anymore, and they talk about risk reduction. To me, it's not dissimilar, and I don't think we should be shying away from saying we can prevent certain injuries and then we reduce the amount of injuries. But this bottom one is the one that I wanted to highlight to you most, really. For those that can't read that might be on the small screen, Helen Keeble, leaking while lifting, and Linear Patel, protein intake. When, why, and how much. Now, following the pelvic health show that we did in March, I found it such an interesting topic to talk about women's health and incontinence, and certainly when lifting weights, that is something that many of our patients will describe and think that sometimes that's over normalized. However, lots of content to that effect, and whilst that's going to be an absolutely cracking session, and I definitely encourage you to attend it, I will be paying attention, unless I'm moderating that one, which I might be, then Linear Patel, protein intake, when, why, how much, I think is a fascinating topic. Definitely something that I'm really keen to understand more about. I find it coming up in all sorts of different circumstances. And I also find that as someone that might be prescribing or suggesting weightlifting, weight training, resistance exercise generally for a variety of patients, they often will ask us to whether they should make any dietary changes based on that. And eat more protein? What? How much more? Why? Are there any downsides to that? How might we influence that in various different dietary challenges, be that for vegetarianism, veganism, gluten, various different challenges and intolerances that people have. But above all else, can we get a specialist sports nutritionist to talk about protein intake that will apply across the board? And this includes for the elderly and OA and things like that. So really looking forward to that. That again is at 9:15, and you've got an absolute clash of titans there between Helen and Linear. As I say, though, I'm particularly excited to hear from Linear, but that's just my personal bias, having not heard content to that effect on our channels recently. But having more on the incontinence side, but obviously a big difficult one to pick from. Next up, later on, you've got some brilliant and challenging clashes there. JD Abram has got some really insightful points to make about the integration of technologies. JD works for Vald Health and Performance, and trying to explain a bit about how we can integrate their technologies into rehab as well as into diagnostics, and making sure that then we move past sort of gimmicks and gadgets obviously Meekins is talking about something that isn't shoulder related, which is mental, which is when it goes wrong getting strong. He injured himself, injured his back deadlifting. So he'll be recounting that story for us all at 10 o'clock. Toss up between those two. I've heard a lot more from Meekins than I have from JD, and I'm interested in the technology side. So certainly I'll be left of that list at this time. But certainly a toss up again as to where you would go. Mark Sear and Andrew McCauley, big split there. I think what's fun there is Andy McCauley's title is a class 1, getting ripped while ripped. So what do you do to modify training around injuries? How can you do that? How can you adjust your behaviour and get your patients moving and lifting whilst injured? Mark Sear, a great Olympic lifter and therapist who will be giving us sort of insights into Olympic lifting. I think that will be a really useful look at the specifics of that genre. I think that's where I'd like to see more content to that effect, really, is to giving us an understanding of what people are asking of their bodies in certain disciplines. I mentioned at the start of the show about the balance between, say, CrossFit and Olympic lifting. It's like they overlap, and so people sometimes then think it's irrelevant. But it's not, right? When someone's doing certain complex as part of their Olympic lifting training, you might do some of that in their CrossFit, but you wouldn't necessarily be doing that off the back of a series of, say, box jumps and muscle ups and stuff that you might see in CrossFit. And so immediately after Mark's session, you'll see there that Rosie Wills is on about understanding CrossFit. So giving some insights into that world that she's involved in as both a therapist and of course then as an athlete. So that's one of the things that's useful. Both Mark and Rosie participate in those sports, friends of the show, friends of our ecosystem that is in MSK. And so great to be able to get them on and sharing what they're passionate about, both professionally and personally. You see in the bottom right there, though, and this is what's tough because I love Rosie to bits and I'm really looking forward to watching her session afterwards. But Chris Peel, 11:45, therapy and coaching insights from world record lifters. Those that don't know Chris Peel, he's worked with, I can't think of a therapist that's worked with more world record holders for heavy lifts, especially deadlift. Unbelievable career, but also really interesting. He's a sports rehabilitator, trainer by background, wanted to get more insights into rehab and injury, but also comes from a performance and coaching background. So he gets that real mix. And I just think that's going to be an absolute box office session. Really glad that he's on the agenda. I'm really pleased to have him. So that's certainly a session to be, if I was to have to be forced on where I might be going at that point, I think I'll be, I usually multi-screen these things, but that one will be where I am at. Then we've got our very own Jack March. I've heard enough of him, so I might not be attending. But imagine that managing OA in the gym goer, I can't think of a more pertinent and relevant topic. Certainly something that was asked for when we were brainstorming this. A lot of people wanting that session. You notice there on the right, Joe Turner, using exercise to process stress and emotion. Really interesting contrast there where you've got something very clinical, medical, and then Joe going to be covering something that then will speak to many of us, really. As people and as therapists, we're often active and sometimes using exercise for good and sometimes in a negative coping mechanism for stress and emotion, but also, of course, patients doing so as well. And they might see us having in quite significant distress that they can't do that anymore. So definitely well worth having a look at that. And Joe will be brilliant as ever, our partner through MEHAB. The next one I wanted to just highlight is when we're putting this brainstorm together for the sessions, one of the big ones is just identifying disciplines. So I talked about CrossFit, bodybuilding, powerlifting, thinking about strongman training, thinking about Olympic lifting. What specific, I'm a bit torn really, and I'm interested in whether or not you guys have got any thoughts on this. What do you think? Do you think it matters that we as therapists might not have a good insight into those disciplines and how they are relevantly different from each other? Like, I feel like it is relevant and useful for us too, but people sometimes think it's like a helpful thing, right? I'll go and be a physio for a basketball, knowing the sport is an afterthought. I feel it should be something much more central. And I would apply that to the lifting sports when I think about those disciplines and those differences. And since the Arnold Sports Festival that we appeared at recently, I feel like that is something that the patients increasingly want, those athletes increasingly want. They want you to be able to get ahead. They don't want to necessarily have to teach you for 15 minutes about exactly what it is that they need to be able to do as a Olympic lifter. You know, they don't want to really have to sort of explain to you what is the relevant difference between even a snatch and a clean and jerk, never mind a sort of snatch and a dumbbell press. You know, it's something that really I think we need to get ahead of. If you want to be a good therapist at managing these athletes and you want to be dealing with these things in a timely manner, then I think that that would be smart. So please do let me know as to whether or not you disagree. Is having deep insights into particular disciplines within sports, is that a cherry on top, or is that a major part of the cake? I'd be interested in your thoughts on that before I move on to this next one. Alex Kras, we've been wanting. I bottled it there. I call him Alex Kras because I always struggle to pronounce his surname. Sorry, Alex. I probably learnt once and then I've managed to forget. Why use squat variations? And then alongside Mary McMahon, she's doing understanding powerlifting. A fantastic session of the ilk that I was just describing before with Rosie and Mark. And you notice then in a second I'll be going through into showing you Tom Flanagan doing about bodybuilders. These are great insight sessions into this exactly what I just talked about, really. Then you've got an athlete in Lois Smith, one of the leading CrossFit athletes in the country. She's going to be talking about competition and therapy. She is a sports rehabilitator by background professionally, but also a great CrossFit athlete. And so someone that's going to be able to give us an insight from both sides of that, which will be brilliant. We've got Matt Scar's book on Massage Matters Live. I need to find out exactly what the title is on that, but it will be a really interesting one because your massage therapies are used so much across the gym industry for good and ill, and so no doubt Matt and his team will be speaking to the who's and ahs of that. Right, they're going to be no doubt busting some myths, but also explaining where they feel the sort of appropriate evidence is for the use of it in recovery or in generalized sort of a training. Is there anything that's there for preparation or activation or just generally for pain relief? They'll no doubt get stuck into that. And so whilst I'm sorry I haven't got the specific title on that, I will find it out for you. We'll talk about it later this week. Last but no means least, these are the last two sessions and we finish with a flourish. I think that Susie Spears' session, we've been trying to get her on the show for a while. I think that has been rearranged, unfortunately, but do keep an eye out in case that's I'm mistaken. But Mike James, I mean, he's so popular. Always, we're delighted to have him back on Therapy Live Sport. Massively attended sessions last year at our triathlon event. Of course, the endurance physio, but he's going to be talking a bit about grip strength and what that tells you. I think that's one of the things that's interesting is that for those that don't know, grip strength tends to correlate significantly with various different forms of issue and mortality and injury risk and stuff. So Matt's going to get stuck into that evidence, and you can imagine how applicable that is to gym sports and weightlifting. But finally, the battle of the Toms, Thomas Deckers and Tom Flanagan. Now, Thomas did a session at Therapy Live in June, which was really interesting about athletic back pain. He's going to be more specifically talking about deadlifting for back pain, why, when, and how. Very interesting. Always a thoughtful guy who will no doubt be talking about a really lovely blend of the evidence as he pursues his PhD in a similar field, but also how that intersects with his experience as a top therapist over in Ireland. And then Tom Flanagan, one of our own, talking about bodybuilding and the pursuit of aesthetics and what we need to understand about those that want to lift for aesthetic gain, which is many people. And that's obviously bodybuilding is the sort of extreme of that, of course. But I think it will translate quite nicely, give you insights into that, insights into the evidence, no doubt. But also, I think if we're honest, I think that sometimes makes us as therapists feel uncomfortable. I'll admit it does me, whereby people are sometimes, you pursuing reasons that they might be doing that is to make themselves a different shape, to aspire to a different physique, and to often, that's coupled with the other benefits of exercise with regards to sort of mental and physical health gains. But they do want to look better, to be a different shape. And why not? It's not a problem. But when it starts to become something that becomes the not a side effect of the training, but the actual ultimate goal in bodybuilding for the on a sport level, which also then involves making dietary and hydration adjustments to get where you need to be in terms of looks. That's where it starts to be more of a challenge, and the deeper we can understand that, the better. And so that's where Tom's going to be able to give us those insights. But when I said about clashes, right, that's a classic one, right? The battle of the Toms. Last thing, Flanagan versus Deckers, and I'm massively on the fence. I think one of the things I will do is I'll admit, really enjoyed Thomas Deckers' session that I watched from June's Therapy Live. Tom Flanagan, whilst he's been a moderator on these before, hasn't had a keynote, and so I will be attending Tom Flanagan's session and scurrying off early so I'm ready for my closing remarks as I do my final sum up and giveaways and stuff. But yeah, Tom Flanagan, last thing, he just pips it. If you force me to choose. And I think, to be fair, I'm trying to educate myself as to where the gaps are in my own knowledge. You know, I really would like to understand that side better, understand where the evidence might inform some of our styles of practice for when people are there. Why do people do it? What is it that's making them tick? What do they want from their therapists? How much can we make sure we empathize with their pursuit of aesthetic gains when we're used to, say, performance and recovery related stuff? You know, I found it interesting. I've got a comment here. I'm sorry, I'm a few minutes late bringing it up, so I don't think it was necessarily about bodybuilding, but Steve Vogel, hi Steve. He said, I agree, I do rugby pitch side and important to know key elements of the demands of a position, and when discussing immediate return to play, it also guides rehab longer term. So I imagine this is speaking to my point about how, which I asked you all directly. Apologies, I've just had a text through saying that their comment isn't showing up. Sorry about that. We're still having some tech issues as we refine this on Restream, but this has come through from Facebook. So this was when I was asking how useful is it to understand the specifics of disciplines, and Steve's given a rugby example here. I always think that's a really useful one. It's something that's in my subjective assessment. As soon as they play in rugby, what position do they play? And then people are surprised when I go a bit deeper and say, not just what position are they playing, but what do you feel is the strength of your game? You know, if someone says someone's got come in with a knee ligament injury, I ask about what position they play. I'm a centre. And what do you feel is a real strength of the game, of your game? And sometimes I'll break that down into defensive and attacking and stuff. And they'll say, I've got a sort of an infamous step, side step. And that's really relevant, isn't it, to a knee ligament injury? If they pride themselves and they're strong on their step, and they can cut really quickly and they evade tackles because of it, right? It's going to have implications on them, their sense of self, their sense of position within a team, within a squad, their reputation. And so rehabilitation should encompass that, and also helping them in the early stages of something like that recognize how these things might justify some of the treatment that we're suggesting for them. Now, in a weightlifting sense, that is where I do think that we need to be better. I think that the ways in which we might be able to help someone to understand that this is why we're going to load you up this way and we're going to integrate this particular movement is because it's simulating a version of what your forearm needs to do when you do and then insert X, right? Insert snatch or muscle up or whatever, right? If you're getting them to do something like that, then the more you can indicate to them as to why you're bringing that sport-specific angle to it, I think is really useful. And so Steve's making a point here in rugby, which I think transfers really well. I do understand, though, that people feel sometimes just get the basics right and it doesn't matter so much, as long as they're gripping, they're pulling, they're pushing, they're squatting, then, it'll all sort of come out in the wash and you can be more sport-specific later on. I do understand and respect that argument. I don't necessarily think that, this is always where we're in the realms of subjectivity. I don't think necessarily I've got hard evidence to support or negate that either way. But for me, I always think that drawing a crisp line between what it is we're asking of them in rehab and then what comes later in terms of the pursuit of specific on-pitch or in-gym activity, I think that the cleaner that is, even early doors, the better. I think the more it can sort of simulate it. And I don't mean like you aspiring to something like pseudo-functional. I'm just meaning like that explaining that is a low weight, slow speed version of the same thing. You know, if someone's needing to position himself in a certain way, then aspiring to that and helping the person know that you have insights into what they need to do with their body in time, so that they're not just going through the motions generically. They're not just going through generic range of movement and strength related exercise just for the sake of capacity. I think people get away with that a little bit more post-op, or if they've got some sort of generalized, say, more obvious orthopedic pathway type, you know, there's a certain amount of weeks out of a cast from a fracture or whatever, and you just need to restore range and get generic strength back. But the sooner that you can get people aspiring to things that simulate what they want to do with themselves, I think is massive. And so, yeah, thanks for that, Steve. Really appreciate it. For those that haven't seen yet, please do tune back into this. Those that are just joining now, I'm about to wrap up, but essentially we've just gone through some of the massive heavyweight clashes in the program. And so do have a little look through either this video afterwards, or go to therapy-live.co.uk to get your last of the few tickets that we have available, but also to look through the program and try and work out what you're going to do, how you're going to plan your day, and let us know on social media as well. Do be sharing #therapylive and let us know where you've decided what your plans for your day are. I'd be much appreciated. All right, so I'll see you there. See you Saturday, and also I won't see you tomorrow. I think Leanne will be on tomorrow, but I'll see you on Wednesday, where I think we're going to be chewing over some reflections on the Physio UK virtual conference that I was at on Saturday. Chairing a session on that, as well as then some reflections on the format and the style, etc. of that, which a few of you, especially over on LinkedIn, have asked me to share my thoughts, those that spotted that I was over there. So I will be doing that on Wednesday. So thanks a lot. I'll see you all soon, and take care.